I read 4 books in January, which is not a ton for me, but I've been in kind of a bad reading slump since last fall, and I'm slowly making my way out of it. I would have liked to read more than 4 books this month, but it is what it is. It's not a competition, and I'm recording this right now on February 6th, and I've already finished 2 books in February, so I have a feeling things are looking up. And by that I mean I feel like I'm finally getting that love for reading, and not that it was gone before, but if you read a lot, you know the feeling of when you kind of hit a book slump and nothing excites you as much as you should. And I think it's because I burnt myself out with so many fantasy books last year, and I love fantasy, but I think it was a little overkill. And after one of my fantasy reads this month, I'm like, I need to take a break for a bit from fantasy, which is okay, and explore other genres. I'm gonna make one of these reading wraps every month throughout the year, so you'll get 11 of 12 of them. I don't know if I'll do a December one or not. I promise my math is good. I know there are 12 months in the year. But then I'll do a yearly wrapped up, and these little mini wrap ups will be a great way for me to talk more about each book, because when I do the yearly wrap up, I can only say so much and it's still a long video. Let's just jump right into it and yap about these books I read this month. I forget what order I read them, so I have to look on my Goodreads. Hold on. Also, can we talk about the Goodreads reading challenge this year? I hate that I can't see other people's, because I like looking at them and I like other people seeing mine. And also, it's such a pain to get to the books. I don't know why the apps feel like they need to update things when they're perfectly fine as they are. But anyways, that is a topic for another day. I feel like I say that a lot in these videos, but I feel like I can be opinionated on certain things, and I'm trying not to be that way. For me, my rating scale goes 1 star is I could not find any redeeming quality of this book. 2 stars is I can find some redeeming qualities of this book, but I did not enjoy it at all. 3 stars is either, it can mean one of 2 things for me. It can mean this wasn't a bad book, but it wasn't for me, or there was just nothing special about this book, but I enjoyed it enough, and it could mean one or the other, or both of those things at the same time. 4 stars is I like this, and it just did not give me that 5-star feeling. And 5-star is this is one of my favorite books. I loved every second of it, had such a fun time reading it, and gives you that feeling of you forget you're reading and you're gravitating towards picking up that book to continue reading. So that's kind of what my rating scale will be throughout the year and what it has been. I feel like I'm not a harsh rater reviewer. I, again, can be opinionated on some things, but it's so fun and funny at the same time to see people like books that I don't like and people hate books that I love. So reading is so subjective that if you have a different opinion than me, that's totally fine. We can agree to disagree, and that's why it's so great that there are so many books out there. There won't be that long of an explanation throughout the months, but since this is the first one, that's kind of the baseline for what I think is gonna happen. Starting off with the first book I read in January, The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. The Cruel Prince is about a girl named Jude who her and her twin sister and their older sister get kidnapped by a fairy who is the father of the older sister. They're raised in this fairyland as humans. There's a Prince Cardan among other princes, and they're all fighting kind of for the throne. And Jude and Cardan hate each other. They're classmates, cannot stand each other because Cardan is a bully. The humans really get picked on in this land because there's not many of them. But Jude discovers that she's really good at trickery, she's a good spy, gets roped into this kind of quest. Which for some reason, I thought these books came out a long time ago, but they're actually not that old. And I'm also surprised that I haven't read them before. But I think it's probably because they're not as old as I thought they were. And I've had them for a long time, but I don't have the physical copies with me right here, right now. And they were on Kindle Unlimited, so I was like, let me pick it up. It's not too long of a fantasy book, and to my understanding, it wouldn't be a super dense, heavy fantasy book, which it wasn't, which was exactly what I wanted at the time. I gave The Cruel Prince 4 stars and had a lot of fun reading it, honestly. I love female main characters like Jude. She's so strong and powerful, and it's so interesting to see the dynamic of that versus the male main character being, I don't know what the word for Cardan would be. He's just, I don't want to call him weak because he's not weak, but it's fun to see Jude be a lot more skilled in combat, and Cardan just kind of shies away from that. I haven't read that in a fantasy yet. It's usually either the other way around or both partners are equally as competitive, I guess. Reading The Cruel Prince reminded me of reading fantasy books when I was younger, and I would get obsessed with them. Like, this book would have been one I would have absolutely loved in middle school or high school, and that sounds like a diss at her writing, but it's not. I love heavier fantasies now, and I still really enjoyed this, obviously, with the 4-star, but I think I would have absolutely ate this up and gave it 5 stars in middle school, which is funny. It was a fun, silly, goofy time. The world is really unique of Jude being a human living in the fairyland, and the politics that went into it weren't super fleshed out, but I think that's why I enjoyed it, because I could just go for the vibes, and I rate a lot of books based on the vibes. Because was this the best writing I've ever read? No, but usually books I read aren't, so I don't understand why people hate on this book so much, because I see such mixed reviews, which is why I wanted to read it so bad personally. But yeah, I enjoyed it and would recommend it, especially if you're wanting to dip your toes in fantasy. I think that this trilogy would be a great introduction, a great intro to fantasy reading. And that's coming from someone that has not finished the trilogy yet, which I'll get to why in a minute. It's kind of annoying. But the second book I read, I jumped right into the second book in the trilogy, The Wicked King, again, Holly Black. You know, I enjoyed something enough when I don't want to break from it, and I wanted to go right into the next one. And that one was also on Kindle Unlimited, so I was like, why not? And I rated this one a 4 stars. I didn't have a ton of time to read in January because I was just so busy, and again, not really in the headspace to want to spend all my free time reading, which is sad because I love reading so much. But if I did have more time to read this, I think I would have flown through it in a day or two, because it really is a fast read. But at this point, once I finished this one, I was loving the series. And when I did have time to sit down, I was able to get through a good portion of it and be entertained enough. What I really was appreciating about these books, like I mentioned before, it was nice to have a break and read a more digestible fantasy book where it didn't take you hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages to understand the world and the politics and the characters and all of that, because I love that, but I was not in the mood for it. And if I would have read a fantasy book like that right now, I think I would have gotten into a deeper reading slump. And when I finished this, the reason I haven't read the third one yet is because I set it down. The ending I loved. I was so excited to read the third one, and it's not on Kindle Unlimited, so I'm gonna have to wait until I am able to access my physical copies and read the third one, and then you'll see my final thoughts on the whole trilogy. But for now, that's where I'm at. The ending wasn't exactly what I was expecting in a good way, but let's be real, I did kind of expect something that happened at the end, but then something that happened after that, and sorry, I'm being so vague, being really careful about spoilers, I wasn't expecting that, like the very, very end. Overall, these books so far have just been very simple, easy, fun, cute, and I would recommend them. Are they my favorite fantasy books ever? No, definitely not, but they're fun, and I love a good enemies to lovers. I love the dynamic between Jude and Cardan. It's like opposite gender roles from fantasy books I typically read, at least on Cardan's part. So that's fun to read, and they do have reason to actually not like each other throughout the series, and it's fun to watch how it plays out, and I'm really excited to jump into the third one with what happens at the end of The Wicked King. So yeah, again, I'll update you once I get to that. Who knows what month that will be? It might not be until like April, who knows, I don't know. But I would like to try not to go too long, because sometimes I tend to do that and stop in the middle of series just because I lose the desire to read them, so hoping that doesn't happen. The third book I read was The Naturals. I saw this on Kindle Unlimited, but I am so picky about mystery books, that it's really frustrating that I'm so 50-50. I either enjoy something or I really don't. It's discouraging when you know so many mystery books that you pick up you just don't like. And I like a very specific mystery book. The type of mystery books I like, my favorite mystery author is Holly Jackson, and I've read every one of her books, and so I have to wait for her new ones to come out every time she announces a new one. So I'm trying to be on the search of that type of vibe of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, the reappearance of Rachel Price, 5 survive. I like that type of mystery where, I don't know if you can hear the wind, but it's so windy and cold today. But yeah, I have been struggling to find some, and I saw someone on TikTok recommend The Naturals, so I looked it up. It was on Kindle Unlimited. I thought, why not just give it a try? Little did I know, Jennifer Lynn Barnes is the author of The Inheritance Games, and I'm really glad I didn't put 2 and 2 together before starting The Naturals, because I don't think I would have even picked it up, because I really did not like The Inheritance Games. I read it a couple years ago and struggled to get through it. Glad I didn't know that information when I went into The Naturals, but I'm so glad that I found The Naturals because I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. The best way for me to describe this book, and by the way, it is such a fast read. I think it only took me 4 hours to read it, and it had me so hooked throughout the entire time, and I love that it was very character driven. But the best way for me to describe this book is like watching a Criminal Minds episode. It's so interesting. It's about this program that the FBI created called The Naturals, where they recruited a bunch of people with these natural gifts, abilities, like profiler, someone that's really good at stats, someone who's really good at detecting lies, someone who's good at reading emotions, that type of thing. There are these kids that are in this program, and they're there to help solve cold cases. We follow our main character, Cassie, who her mother was murdered when she was younger, and her mother taught her how to be a good profiler. So she gets recruited by the FBI. This murder mystery happens that may be linked to her mother's murder, like it's happening in current time. So her and her friends, who are all 17 whatever year old kids, who are using their abilities to help the FBI solve this ongoing murder kidnapping type investigation. I really liked this, and it's really fun to see how Jennifer weaves the web of this, and also through the characters' minds of what their abilities are. Whether or not there are kids like this who are able to have these abilities, I do think that there are probably a lot of kids out there that don't even realize it, but it really felt like watching a Criminal Minds episode, which is one of my favorite shows ever. I flew through this in a few sittings. I was heading the right direction with the plot twist, but I still didn't get it right completely, and it shocked me, and it all tied together really well. And there's also a little dash of romance that is fun. I can't wait to see how that continues throughout this series. I'm just obsessed with the premise of this. Like, I wish I would have thought of this. And I love the characters. I love how they interact. I cannot wait to get into the second one. So once I have time and the desire for another mystery, I'm definitely gonna jump into the next one. The last book I read this month, Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros, which I had to sadly give 3 stars. And I think I only gave it 3 stars because when I rate series, it usually builds off the previous books. And Iron Flame and Fourth Wing were both 5-star reads for me. So I'm not going to give any spoilers for Onyx Storm, but if you haven't read Fourth Wing or Iron Flame, maybe click off, because, you know, like if I'm explaining the premise of the 3rd book, it probably will spoil the other ones. But there will not be Onyx Storm spoilers in this. This book picks up right where we left off in Iron Flame. And then it jumps to 2 weeks later, and then the rest of the book is following that. But we know Xaden is Venom, and Violet is on the search to try to save him. I went into this book with high expectations and overall was pretty disappointed with it. And I hate saying that because I love this series and I love Rebecca, and I'm going to keep reading it, but it makes me really nervous for the direction that the series is going to. And I've seen very mixed reviews, but honestly, I feel like I've been seeing more negative ones than ones of people loving it. And if you loved this book, I'm so happy for you, genuinely, because I wish I had. The reason I didn't like this book is that it felt like a massive info dump, and of what was happening, of new characters. Oh my gosh, the amount of new characters that were introduced. I was so confused, but I also saw videos of people talking about how they did reread Iron Flame and Fourth Wing, whatever, and they were still confused and still overwhelmed by the amount of things that were introduced in this book. We know this is the 3rd book of 5 coming out, so 2 more will be coming out. When you read a lot of fantasy books, you tend to learn that the books in the middle, a lot of times, especially if it's between like 3, 5 books, whatever, tend to be massive filler books. And Sometimes they can be done well and they can be necessary for the story if it's important to spend more time with the characters to learn who they are before you get to the finale of the series, which the next 2 books of the series will be the finale. The same plot points throughout the entire story, and I was very bored and I was struggling to get through it. And like I mentioned, I have been struggling with my reading and my reading slumpishness, and it does not help when you just don't want to pick up a book, and especially a book that I was so excited about. I was waiting by the door. My mom can attest to this. I was practically checking my phone every 2 seconds to see when Onyx Storm would be delivered because I was that antsy to get my hands on it, especially because it came 2 days after release date, even though I was one of the first probably ever to pre-order it because I pre-ordered it the second it was announced. Initially, there were some elements of the story that were interesting to me, but it got redundant and I started to feel very bored. I was not as invested in it as I was with Fourth Wing or Iron Flame, and I know it's an unpopular opinion to have loved Iron Flame because I really did love Iron Flame. There were so many new characters, new adventures, new political maneuvers that were introduced at the same time that it got very overwhelming, and I could not keep track of who was doing what they were trying to do, what their achievement was, whatever. I wish there were less people that were mentioned and those people were expanded upon more because I feel like I got the very surface level of every character in this book. It's hard to read a book when you're not invested in the characters, and the only characters I feel like we've really got a better look into were Violet and Xaden. And my favorite part about the book was their romance, which obviously is a big part of the series, but also the fantasy aspect is an even bigger part of the series, and none of this would be possible without the fantasy aspect. So instead of focusing on one central storyline, it felt like it was jumping all over the place, and it makes me feel like Rebecca doesn't even know exactly what direction she wants to take these books. That's what I felt like when I was reading it. And when it was jumping from one thing to another, nothing was being heavily developed on. So again, it all felt very surface level to me of, oh, I need to make 10 things happen in this book, so let's do that. That's what it felt like. There were some fun things that definitely happened throughout this book, but it felt like the case of too much happened, but nothing happened. Which is a weird feeling, but it happens sometimes with books. All that being said, I did appreciate again the relationship between Violet and Xaden and seeing that expand more and become more healthy compared to the last 2 books. That was sweet to see, and more friendships being developed on, and that there was some time spent between them. There was one part that made me tear up a little bit towards the end, and if you've read it, you probably know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, nothing else that happened, no other deaths that happened made me, they made me sad, but I wasn't invested in the characters, and I think it's because we didn't get to spend as much time with them this book. So either I forgot how much I liked them before, or I don't know. And I know Rebecca's trying to prove the point that in the military, because her husband was in the military and served for 20 years, that it very much is like, let's read your name and that's pretty much it. But the final battle was very anticlimactic. We were jumping from point of view at the end. It got really confusing and boring, and this is one of my most anticipated reads of the year, and unfortunately I was really disappointed. This is how I felt with Crescent City 3 and A Court of Silver Flames. I know she worked really hard on this, but I am worried for the rest of the series. I really am. I really hope book 4 redeems itself because I love this story and I love you, Rebecca, but I want to see these books succeed, and I'm gonna give the next one another shot, but if it's like this, I don't think I can do it. But that's my long yapping session on the 4 books I read this month. Make sure to stay tuned for some fun content coming up in the near future and more monthly wrap-ups throughout the year. Thanks for yapping with me.